It started in the chaos of a border town, a place where desperation hangs thick in the air and every decision feels like a gamble with your life. Layla, a young mother from Aleppo, stood among dozens of others, clutching her son Sami's hand tightly. She wasn't just escaping a war zone. She was chasing a dream, a chance for her son to have a future. They had traveled for weeks to reach this point, selling everything they owned for this moment. But this wasn't the end of their journey. No, the border was just the beginning. Layla knew the real danger lay ahead, in the unknown paths, shadowy figures, and whispered warnings of the road to Europe. That's when he arrived, Elias. He strode into the crowd like he owned the place, a calm, self-assured man in a weathered jacket. His voice carried over the murmurs. "If you want to get across the border safely, I can take you there. I know the way." To a desperate group of people, Elias seemed like a savior. He spoke of secret routes, hidden trails that bypassed patrols and checkpoints. He made promises of safety, of success. But there was one catch. Elias demanded total obedience. "Stick with me," he said, "or risk losing everything." For Layla, the decision wasn't easy. She wasn't sure if she trusted this stranger, but as she looked down at Sami, clinging to his tattered stuffed animal and staring up at Elias with wide eyes, she made her choice. There were no better options. They would follow him. What else could they do? But in the back of her mind, Layla couldn't shake a single thought. How could a man so confident, so polished, know these paths so well? And what was he hiding beneath that calm smile? The group set off under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the dense forest floor. Elias led the way, his movements precise, like he'd done this 100 times before. He didn't just know the trails, he owned them. Every turn, every pause, it all felt deliberate, calculated. At first, Layla felt a flicker of relief. Elias seemed to have a plan. He spotted patrol lights in the distance before anyone else and guided them off the trail to wait in silence until the danger passed. His instincts were sharp, almost too sharp. Sami clung to her side, whispering, "He's smart, Mama. He knows everything." Layla didn't have the heart to tell him that she wasn't so sure. Moments like that built trust. When an older man stumbled on loose rocks, Elias was there to catch him. When a young woman struggled with her pack, he carried it for her. He even shared his water with Sami when Layla's supply ran low. To most of the group, Elias wasn't just a guide, he was a savior, but Layla couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too perfect. And then came the first red flag. Karim, a young man from Damascus, raised the question everyone was too afraid to ask. "Why are we going this way? It feels like we're moving in circles." The air grew tense as Elias turned, his expression colder than before. "If you think you know better," Elias said, his voice cutting through the night like a blade, "you're welcome to find your own way." Karim fell silent, but Layla noticed his jaw tighten. The seed of doubt had been planted. As the group pressed on, Layla found herself watching Elias more closely. His every move, every word, seemed carefully designed to keep them on edge, to keep them loyal. And in the pit of her stomach, she felt it, a creeping unease she couldn't ignore. The terrain changed as the group moved deeper into the wilderness. The forest gave way to rocky paths, barren hills, and an oppressive silence. Elias claimed they needed to avoid known trails, but the detour felt endless. The landmarks became stranger, discarded shoes, torn fabric snagged on bushes, and markings on the rocks. In Arabic and Greek, the warnings were etched like ghostly whispers. "Turn back." Layla's unease grew with every step. When she asked about the signs, Elias dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Superstition," he said, his tone firm. "People leave these to scare others off the path. Ignore them." The group obeyed, but Layla noticed how Karim glanced at the warnings, his eyes narrowing with doubt. That night, while searching for water, Layla stumbled upon something chilling, a torn photograph. A family she didn't recognize smiled in happier times, now dirt-stained and forgotten in this no-man's land. Nearby, a faded ID card lay half-buried, the photo on it blurred but recognizable as a refugee. The date? Months ago. The realization hit her like a blow. They weren't the first group Elias had led this way. Her breath quickened as she tucked the ID card into her pocket and returned to the group. When she showed it to Elias, his response was colder than she expected. "Do you have any idea how many people pass through here?" he snapped. "If you focus on ghosts, you'll lose sight of survival." The group fell silent, his words a command, but Layla couldn't shake the feeling that Elias wasn't just angry, he was hiding something. As the group pushed forward, fatigue and fear settled into their bones. Layla felt her grip tighten on Sami's hand. She couldn't tell if it was the fear of what lay ahead, or the growing certainty that Elias was leading them into something far worse than the border patrols they were trying to avoid. The group stopped for the night in a desolate clearing, their campfire struggling against the cold, oppressive darkness. Layla sat close to Sami, her arms wrapped around him as he slept. She could feel the tension in the air, Karim sitting apart from the others, Elias pacing the edge of the camp, his shadow long and restless. Elias had changed. The calm confidence that once reassured the group had twisted into something sharper, more volatile. He no longer entertained questions. When the older woman in the group asked how much farther they had to go, Elias snapped, "Do you think I'm stalling? If you don't trust me, you can leave." No one dared speak after that. That night, Layla couldn't sleep. She watched the fire die down and listened to the rustle of the wind, or at least she thought it was the wind. Somewhere in the distance, she heard footsteps, soft but deliberate. She held Sami closer, her heart racing, but she couldn't bring herself to investigate. Morning couldn't come soon enough. And then, just before dawn, they realized someone was missing. Nadia, a quiet woman who had barely spoken the entire trip, was gone. Her belongings were still there, untouched. Elias claimed she must have wandered off. "This is why I tell you to stay close," he said, his voice cold, almost indifferent. But Layla wasn't convinced. She had heard those footsteps in the night, and she was sure someone, or something, had taken her. The group pressed on in silence, the weight of Nadia's disappearance heavy on their minds. Layla stayed close to Sami, her eyes darting between Elias and the dense terrain around them. The question burned in her mind. If this was truly a path to safety, why did it feel more like a trap with every step? With each passing hour, Elias's grip on the group tightened, his control fueled by fear. Layla knew they couldn't keep following him blindly, but breaking away might be even more dangerous. She had to make a choice, and soon. The clearing appeared out of nowhere, an open space in the middle of the barren wilderness. Elias stopped abruptly and turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. "This is it," he said. "Our allies will meet us here." Layla looked around, her unease growing. The ground was littered with the remnants of past travelers, shoes, clothes, and something else. Shallow mounds of earth, disturbed and unmarked. Karim, who had been silent for hours, stepped forward. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "Where are we really, Elias?" The group froze, their eyes darting between Elias and Karim. For the first time, Elias didn't have an immediate answer. He hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. Layla's heart sank. Layla's eyes caught something glinting in the dirt. A knife, partially buried, its blade stained with something dark. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't a meeting point, it was a trap. Her hands tightened around Sami's shoulders as her breath quickened. She wasn't just afraid, she was terrified. Elias's mask finally slipped. "You don't understand," he said, his voice sharp, almost pleading. "This is the only way." But Karim wouldn't back down. "You've been lying to us this whole time," he shouted. "You've let others hear, haven't you?" The group erupted into whispers, panic spreading like wildfire. And then, the sound. A low rumble in the distance. Engines. The group turned toward the noise, dread sinking into their bones. Layla knew what was coming. She could feel it. The traffickers Elias had been working with were on their way, and now they were the cargo. Trapped in the clearing, with betrayal at their backs and danger rushing toward them, the group faced an impossible choice: confront Elias or run for their lives. For Layla, only one thing mattered: getting Sami out alive. But how do you escape when every path leads deeper into the nightmare? The group had no time to think. The sound of engines grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the barren clearing. Elias stepped back, his hands raised in a feigned show of control. "Stay calm," he said, but his voice cracked. Layla could see it now, the fear in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. Karim acted first, lunging toward Elias. The The two men struggled as the group hesitated, torn between helping or fleeing. Layla's instincts took over. "Run!" she shouted, pulling Sami toward the jagged rocks on the edge of the clearing. The others followed, scattering like leaves in the wind. Behind the rocks, Layla held Sami close, whispering for him to stay silent. She could hear the engines now, closer than ever, and the harsh voices of men calling out commands. From their hiding spot, she saw them, figures stepping out of the trucks, armed and searching. The traffickers had arrived. Karim's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. He had overpowered Elias and now held him at knife point. "Tell them we're gone," he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. But Elias only laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "They'll find you," he spat. "There's no escape." Layla made a decision. She couldn't wait for the traffickers to find them. Clutching Sami's hand, she gestured to the others hiding nearby, mouthing one word, "Run." Together, they bolted, staying low and silent, weaving through the rocky terrain. Behind them, shouts erupted as the traffickers spotted their movement. In the chaos, Layla heard a scuffle, Karim and Elias fighting for control. Then, a sharp cry, followed by silence. Layla didn't turn back to see what happened. She couldn't. All that mattered was Sami, his small hand gripping hers tightly as they ran for their lives. They didn't stop running until the engines faded into the distance and the stars gave way to dawn. But even as the first light broke over the horizon, Layla knew they weren't safe yet. The nightmare wasn't over, not until they crossed that final border, not until they were free. The camp was overcrowded and harsh, but it was a sanctuary. Layla sat by a small fire, watching Sami play with other children. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, but her thoughts lingered on Karim and the lives lost. The scars of betrayal and fear would never fully fade. Layla made a silent vow. She would tell her story, to warn others and to expose the predators who preyed on the desperate. For now, they were alive, and that was enough.